Morning, everyone, and welcome to our discussion with the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training on current and future labor market trends as we continue the road of reopening. So as you would have just seen, we will be recording this morning's discussion and sharing it to watch back later on if you miss any of it. I'm Nicole Shepherd. I'm the Manager of Policy and Partnerships with the Regina Chamber. And I would like to start off this morning by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're gathered on virtually today. The Regina District Chamber of Commerce is situated in Treaty 4 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. We also acknowledge the traditional homeland of the Métis and honor their contributions. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories and are committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. The commitment and conversation, which I think is more important than ever, given the shocking and heartbreaking discovery of yet more unmarked graves at the Marival Indian Residential School site. Our hearts are heavy this morning, and our thoughts and support are with Cowessess First Nation and all individuals, families, and communities impacted. I would like to welcome MLA Derek Myers, who is with us this morning. Thanks for joining us, Derek. And I would also just like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors for this morning's event before we get started, TD Bank and SAS Jobs. Thank you very much for your continued support. Because of you, we're able to continue to share all this really valuable information with our members. So thank you for that. I would now like to introduce our presenters for the morning. Tanvir Islam is the Acting Director in the Saskatchewan Ministry of Immigration and Career Training's Labor Market Intelligence Unit. He has served as the Senior Economist in the unit for several years. Tanvir's professional experience spans a variety of sectors, including labor market policy and data analytics in government, financial advising in the banking sector, academic research in economics, and consulting and project management in the nonprofit sector. Tanvir has led stakeholder teams globally in France, Belgium, Thailand, and Vietnam to foster business and export linkages. Welcome, Tanvir. We also have with us Anna Tablin, who is the manager of the business response team and employer services with the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training. She has worked with the Saskatchewan public sector for nearly 20 years in a variety of areas, including immigration, workforce recruitment and retention, community engagement, healthcare strategy, and labor market development. Born and raised in Saskatchewan, she is passionate in showcasing the opportunities to invest, work, and live in this beautiful province. She obtained her Bachelor of Commerce and Leadership certification from the University of Saskatchewan. Welcome, Anna. And last but certainly not least, we have Dale Daniels, who is the Executive Director of Employment Services with the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training. The Employer Services team supports existing and potential Saskatchewan employers with their human resources and labor market needs. Dale has 14 years experience in senior and executive management roles in the financial services sector, more than 20 years experience in business and human resources consulting in Canada, the US, and the Caribbean, and 10 years experience as a certified performance coach, executive coach, and executive team coach. Dale is also a past lecturer at the University of Regina, Paul J. Hill School of Business, and the University of Saskatchewan Edwards School of Business. Welcome, Dale. I am now going to turn it over to you to bring greetings from the ministry and lead us into Tanvir's presentation. So Dale, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Nicole. Very much happy to be here. And I'm going to echo your sentiments. It is a sad day. Some of the news that we've heard from the Cowessess, and our hearts and prayers go out to the people there. We're going to really jump right into this. So on behalf of the Minister, Minister Harrison, and our Deputy Minister, Clint Repsky, welcome to the session. It's going to be jam-packed. As we're going through, first I want to make sure everybody recognizes that there's going to be a few folks here and we want to make sure that we got the bandwidth. So as soon as I'm done talking, I'm going to turn off my camera and we can get started. As we're going through the presentation, it's going to be fairly heavy with statistics and some of our analytics on what's happening in the labor market and in the economy. But what I would like you to do is, as you're going through this and as Tanvir is explaining them, I want you to think about, so what? What does this actually mean to my business? And if you have some questions and you can't answer that question, please put your questions into the chat area, and we will see if we can make sure that we keep attention to that and bring those questions to the front. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn off my mic and my camera and pass it over to Tanvir.
Thank you, Dale. Tanvir here. I guess the introduction has been made, so without further ado, I guess I'll start the presentation here. I'll share my screen. I've switched on my video so that we can get some good bandwidth here. Hopefully, it runs smoothly. If anybody can just confirm that can see my screen here.
Looks good, Tanvir.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So as Dale said, this presentation is more about data and stats on labor market. So since we are, it's just coming out of COVID, in terms of the now and the future, the now is basically we're getting out of COVID and into the recovery zone here. And what some of the future trends are expected, right? Is the essence of my presentation here today. So basically, it's a labor market focused presentation, but I'll just start with one quick slide on the GDP stuff because the economic context is a bit important to set the stage here. So I'll start with the impact on GDP, just quickly on that. Amidst COVID-19 challenges, Saskatchewan's real GDP declined by 5.2% from 81 billion in 2019 to 77 billion in 2020. That's versus the national decline of 5.3%. So just 1.1 basis point less than the national average, but pretty much close to the national average here. In terms of industry, if you can see here on the screen here, arts, entertainment, recreation industry had the largest decline in Saskatchewan. That's mostly in the hospitality sector, no wonder. We all know about that. That's 34.3% decline, right? Compared to the net of 5.2. So that's the heaviest loss on the industry side, from 443 million to 291 million dollars, right? Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, you can see finance, insurance, and industry saw a growth of 4.8%, right? In terms, amidst all those challenges facing other industries. The growth amounted to $2.7 billion in 2019 to 2.8 billion in 2020. So GDP comes in annual data, so we don't have monthly data here. So, but gives you a rough picture where we are set in terms of GDP, because labor market follows that kind of economic precedence, right? So without further delay on the economic side, I'll just move to the labor side now. So in terms of same impact on labor recovery, let's start with the most famous indicator, unemployment rate in the labor market, right? You always see in the news and everything, like that's one of the most popular measure, although other measures like employment rate and stuff are getting more popular. But let's start with that. How that fared during COVID and how we are doing now during the recovery phase. So we see Saskatchewan's labor market continue to recover in May, the latest data available from StatCan, with the lowest unemployment rate among provinces. So we had the best labor market indicator in May across the nation. We were the only province that consistently remained the top 4 lowest unemployment rates all through the pandemic. And Saskatchewan's unemployment rate jumped from 6.3 in February, which is February 20 is kind of the pre-pandemic baseline. So all this through this presentation, whenever I'm comparing with pre-pandemic or any kind of recovery rate, I will be comparing with the February 2020 level, which is the month before everything started to fall apart, right? From March, we counted the COVID impact, right? So in terms of comparing with February 2020, it was 6.3, and then the historic high of 12.4% in May 2020, right? You can see that this jump there, and then before pulling back to 6.3% again in May 2020. Now that 6.3% is already, if you some of you, if you are familiar with the normal unemployment rate or full employment rate, those economic jargons. I'm an economist by training, so I won't go into the jargons myself. But just to give you a context of 6.3 for Saskatchewan is almost pretty tight, almost going to that full employment level, because also Canada doesn't have official normal unemployment rate as US have, but popularly we say 5 to 6% is what the rate should be. So full employment doesn't mean 100% people are employed. It means people who are between jobs and stuff like that. There has to be some unemployment in the economy for a healthy labor market. So 6.3 is getting close to that. So we are going into that zone of tighter labor market slowly towards that. We're already the lowest in the country already, right? So, and as it has remained below the national rate all through the pandemic, right? And it's still below the national rate of 8.2 in May. So, and you can see on the provincial, on the right-hand side, how Saskatchewan's on the top, the lowest right here. Moving on to a little bit more deeper dive into the more unemployment, the reason behind. You can STAT can break that data. So unemployed people, people are looking for jobs are also considered as unemployed. If they're not looking for a job, if they're sitting in their couch eating potato chips, that won't be regarded as unemployed. They will be regarded as out of the labor force. So that's how StatScan defines. And so the data presented here will represent that kind of definition, right? So if we break the unemployment rate here, we'll see that the top orange part is the temporary layoffs that we have seen spike up during the deep COVIDs, right? That's no surprise. We all know that. And then job searches continue to happen. So when we break in the unemployment numbers into those two reasons, would say it's a positive thing when people are unemployed and they're looking for jobs. So that means it's an indication that they're hopeful, they're not discouraged. There's demand in the market. People are looking for jobs, right? When it happens that people are not looking for jobs, there's lots of layoffs. That is when it starts to be concerning, right? So that's why we break this data into the reasons behind it, so that we know, because always headline numbers don't tell you the whole story, right? So you gotta have to deep dive a little bit to see what's really happening inside, right? So this is positive in a sense that when people are searching for jobs, it shows an optimism, right? So we'll see some other optimism kind of stats in later period of the presentation. Moving on to the recovery side now, because COVID kind of happened last year. Maybe we are coming out of the woods. There were second, third waves. Don't know if there will be a fourth wave. Hopefully not. But I mean, in terms of the recovery phase, if we say we are in that, and then how we are doing that, right? So before going to the recovery stage, one more slide on the COVID-19 phase, that reasons for not being in the labor force. Like I said, you have to be looking for jobs to be unemployed. But if you're not actively looking for jobs, you would be considered as not in the labor force by StatCan's data. So this is the reason behind not in the labor force. So popularly school, right? School is a reason that you're not and you're not looking for jobs because you are going to school, maybe, or you're ill, or you have personal responsibilities, or awaiting recall, reply, or discouraged, right? Discouraged part is the most concerning one, as I said before. So if you see those two circles there, like during the deep COVID, like those red bars there during the May 2020 peak of COVID, we could see those awaiting recall and discouraged numbers really went up high, right? That was the most concerning thing. Now, if you see the green bars here, which is during mostly now in May 2021, or reference period now, May 2020, the green bars are pretty lower now, back to their kind of blue part is that pre-COVID period. So you can see those green bars now are close to the, or similar to the blue bars, the pre-COVID level, meaning they are recovering. But on the school side, you could see there's a bit of disparity there. It's not getting back up to the level of the pre-COVID level, right? In terms of personal responsibility, actually, it actually went down, right? And in terms of illness, it's still higher, obviously, with COVID and stuff like that. We can still higher. So this gives you a little bit of picture of, I guess, on the discouraged part and the recall part. No wonder during the deep COVID, you would spike up, and now during recovery on the green bars, you are seeing, it's starting to go down, right? People are starting to get jobs. They're starting to look for jobs as well. So moving on to the recovery side now, what we can see here. So we have seen a very, typical V-shaped recovery during the first wave. You can see here during March, April, we had a little bit of nice kind of, obviously nice. You can see big deep here, right? You can see from the graph here, very much of a V shape. But then on the second wave during October, November, we could see another dip here. The employment graph shows you the dips and ups and downs more clearly
Because we're
than.
going to finalize Gert Strand so we can use those credits that are in Liquor Shack, right?
I put another order this morning.
Just
They
a
already
second.
filled the order and sent it this morning.
So
Could I
do you
just-
even have a question?
Could I just remind everybody to make sure that their microphones are muted and their cameras are off? Sorry, Tanvir.
No problem. Thank you. So yeah, going back to the V-shaped recovery, you can see from the first wave, we had a very, clear V-shaped recovery, and then a little bit of dip during the second wave, and then a little bit on the third wave. So, those were more milder because, the economy was mostly open. It didn't have as much of an impact on what we had the first wave, right? So employment and labor force are seeing, because labor force graph doesn't show much because it also includes the unemployed people. So it's a bit smoother compared to the employment graph, but the employment graph shows you those dips and ups more clearly, right? So I mean, the next slide will tell you a bit of where we are in terms of recovery. So if you see on the left-hand side linear graph here, at the very end, May 2021, we're at 8.4%. That means if you see on the very left, 100% here, that means compared to February 2020 baseline, like I said, with your benchmark, we have recovered 98% of the jobs already by May 2021. So this graph, has the same shape as I have shown in the previous one, shows you the numbers where we have achieved, those percentages of jobs. And you can see during deep COVID, we had lost a lot of jobs right here. And on the right-hand side, you can see the bar where we compare against the various other provinces. We are on the top 4. You can see the green bar here, Saskatchewan top 4, and Canada average is below us, right? So on a net, Canada is 97% recovered from its pre-COVID February 2020 level. Saskatchewan has achieved 98.4% in May. We go to the next slide here.
Just one second, Tanvir, just back to that one. I think it speaks the shape of the graph speaks to a number of things that are going on in Saskatchewan. And the first and foremost is the resiliency of the business in our province. Even though we've gone through first and a bit of a second wave, businesses adapted. They changed their business models, moved to other ways for service delivery and other So I think we should recognize that that's who we are here in Saskatchewan. We're resilient, innovative, and ready to tackle these kinds of challenges going forward.
Thank you, Dale. So the latest month in May, what we are seeing here, Saskatchewan's job growth, monthly job growth, if we say month to month from April to May, was the highest among provinces in terms of both numbers and percentage. Why number is important? Because Saskatchewan is a small province, right? So obviously Alberta, Ontario, and others have bigger population. By number wise, having the highest growth is something really unique, right? So usually it's the percentage that we are surpass other provinces, but this time in both numbers and percentages. This is because all other provinces you can see here on the two bars here, they are all negative. So that means they all had job losses from month to month, from April to May, whereas Saskatchewan and Prince Edward Island are the only two provinces that saw growth. And PEI only had 300 jobs increase. We had 4,000 jobs increase. So in May, due to because Saskatchewan opened a little bit earlier than compared to other provinces as well, right? So the economy is more open compared to other provinces, and so obviously we can see in the data how jobs have also, they are ahead of the other provinces here as well, right? So that's kind of in May. That's pretty good news for Saskatchewan that we had the highest growth, by far from other jurisdictions here. And that's an interesting thing as well. Like, over the last 5 months in 2021, Saskatchewan didn't have a single month of job loss on a month-to-month basis, right? Because why we're focusing month-to-month basis, because now, every month things change so rapidly, right? So we can't see year-over-year changes that much. It's more important to see on a more monthly basis because those fluctuations are important to watch out for, right? So in the last 5 months in 2021, there has been no job losses month to month in Saskatchewan. Either they have increased or remained the same. In 1 month, it remained the same, but no losses whatsoever. So that's a good sign that we are moving forward or being optimistic about our economy, right? So in terms of that full recovery, if you just focus on the youth side of things a little bit, because that's an important cohort in our population, right? So youth is defined as aged 15 to 24 years. They have fully recovered. Although the Saskatchewan province skill rate, as you remember, was 98.4%, you can see on the left-hand side, youth is already at 101%. That means it has recovered and exceeded its February 2020 levels already, right? So that's a good thing. Whereas older workers aged 55 and over are still struggling and lagging behind in May, like you can see on the orange bars here, how the different age groups are faring. So youth is already at 101%, whereas 55 years and older at 92%. So they are still a bit struggling compared to the other age groups, right? The main core age group that we call it 25 to 54, the main core of the working age population, that has already achieved 99.9%. That means almost fully recovered to its February pre-COVID level, level. So, and in terms of gender, interesting here because people have been saying this recession as a secession, right? Because across Canada, women, we all know, has been disproportionately been impacted because of the occupational industry they work in, right, during pandemic. But in terms of in Saskatchewan, women have actually surpassed men in terms of recovery in 2021. Although Saskatchewan also had disproportionate impact on women during COVID for the whole year of 2020, but in 2021, women has just slightly edged up men in terms of recovery. So that's an interesting, indicator for Saskatchewan compared to what's happening in the rest of Canada and across the world. So if we see job recovery varies by class of workers, so SESCAN defines them as class of workers. I know the word may not be the best to say like that, but so it defines in private, public, and self-employed, breaks those into three, the types of different employment. So if you see here, the orange bar, which represents the private sector here, they had the sharpest fall during COVID, right? And then also recovered the fastest. And now at 327 levels. So basically it's almost recovered to its pre-pandemic level, the 330,000, right? But still it has a little bit to go there. Public sector has remained more consistent and has already surpassed its pre-COVID level. On the self-employment side, the green trend line at the very bottom, it's still lagging behind its pre-COVID level of 98.1%. You see it's at 85,000 people. So it's still, lagging behind compared to its pre-COVID level. And it's kind of like it has reached the second lowest level on record since 1976. So the self-employed side, it's not doing much better that side. But private sector is going faster. The rate is growing faster, and so hopefully in a few more months would see a full recovery there. Moving on to the sectoral kind of breakdown of the job recovery. So that's interesting, I guess. StatCan defines those 16 major industries by NAICS. And so we get the data by recovery in terms of employment as well here compared to the pre-COVID February 2020 level. You can see at the top public administration, and then we have wholesale retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, all those blue bars. All those industries have already achieved or exceeded their pre-COVID February 2020 level. The green one is the Saskatchewan all industry. That means the provincial average, which is at 98.4%, as you've seen before. At the bottom of this spectrum here, you can see accommodation and food services, agriculture, information, culture, and recreation. So information, culture, recreation, and accommodation and food services, those two make up the hospitality sector mostly. And I guess more, whoever is involved in the sector, very well, or not even involved, the hospital sector has been hit hardest, right? And so the data also shows that they are at the bottom of the recovery spectrum here, right? Whereas wholesale retail trade and healthcare, they are on the other side of the spectrum, having exceeded their pre-COVID levels already. So that's kind of like the industry picture here, how things are not exactly equal, right? The province has achieved 98.4%, but there are differences in various industries. And so, some people might have, talked about the K-shaped recovery, right? So although in the whole overall economy, on the macro side, we are seeing a V-shape in the first curve and, pretty much, consistent V-shape on the whole overall economy. But if we dig deeper, we could see some of the disparities between the different age groups or different sectors. So that's where we call it, there might be some signs of K recovery here, right? Some sectors or some age groups or some demographics would do better than the other, right? So that is where that K shape comes into play, right? So
Tanvir, we've got a question with the self-employment statistic that you just showed. Would you say that many people are considering their side gigs as self-employment? This would actually mean self-employment is even lower than the stat may suggest. Is there any way to determine self-employment from or differentiate that self-employment from side gigs?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The problem is that the self-employed as defined by StatCan doesn't capture or break down those kinds of side gigs, or you can say disruption, right? Gig economy, right? So the gig economy itself is very hard to measure. Self-employed is basically here. They're basically going by the payroll, right? So if it's a self-employed in the CRE data, or it's reported as self-employed, that's it. So it's more from a kind of like a payroll perspective, rather than what kind of jobs you're doing. Are you doing some informal sector jobs or not? So that does not, you're right, it does not get full capture or even broken down to that, right? So we can't say for sure from a StatCan data perspective that whether what's happening, but yeah, but the intuition that you said, that might be the case. Could be more there.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So that's the industry breakdown here. Um, how things are a bit of disparaging, right? Diverging between different sectors. Moving on to a little bit of the demand side. Um, I always call job vacancies as the leading indicator, or like just like the stock market is the leading indicator, right? Labor market reacts to the economy, right? It's a lagging indicator, whereas the only part of the labor market that has a bit of a leadingness to it is the demand side, the job vacancies, because when employers are opening up, they're posting jobs. That means they're optimistic. They have the capacity to hire people. Now, how the supply side would react, whether they will get the people they need, whether they will get the skills they need, that's the secondary question, right? So the first up, having that labor demand going up shows the economy is being optimistic, things are getting open. Um, there's, um, there's hope that, the employments will again rise up further if those demand and supply meets, right? So in terms of this graph, you can see we usually track SAS jobs and National Job Bank, the two most, kind of covers over 50 to 60% of the jobs posted across Saskatchewan. SAS jobs obviously being the most dominant job board in Saskatchewan. So labor demand in terms of job vacancies, like I said, leading indicator continues to improve, right? In May 2021, if I focus on the latest month here, job vacancies were up year over year for the 8th consecutive month. So the demand side has been showing a bit more positivity compared to the labor market indicators that I showed here before, right? So it has been 8th consecutive month has been higher than its previous year, right? Marking third highest labor demand since January 2018. So you can see here that it's kind of coming up here, right? So, and in terms of monthly job vacancies on SAS, National Job Bank, have seen significant improvements in recent months as well, right? So yeah, I mean, it kind of shows you how things are kind of, opening up and, how things will fare in the future, I guess, if the supply side can meet up those demand side. Anyway, so if I move on to the next part, that, in terms of, all the, positives and optimism that kind of the previous year shows, there are still some challenges in the labor market, right? It's not fully recovered. There are some pockets of weaknesses. Let's kind of delve down into that. So the 98.4% recovery rate that I mentioned before equates to 9,400 fewer jobs since February 2020 level. So if we also cover that 9,000 jobs, we will be at 100% recovery, right? So it is an improvement from previous month, which is April. It was 13,500 jobs shortfall in April. Now we're at 9,400. So it's reducing. We are heading towards a more positive zone. And if you can see the breakdown by those fixed major sectors here, largest shortfalls in accommodation, food services, again, hospitality sector, followed by agriculture and information, culture and recreation. So hospitality sector is there, the largest at the bottom here. You can see the orange bars here, right? 10,500 in accommodation, and information culture is 4,000 jobs still to go to achieve the 100% level at February. Job gains on the other side of the spectrum in sectors such as wholesale trade and healthcare and social assistance. We can see wholesale trade have almost a growth of 9,000 jobs and healthcare 7,000 jobs over its February pre-COVID level. So that's kind of like the industry background. Again, kind of showing you how it's not all equal, homogeneous across different sectors, right? So there is a bit of a discrepancy across different sectors here. I'll move to a little bit of the business side of the data. Here, StatCan started to track that when, during deep COVID, people wanted to know, okay, what's happening with the business sides of things, right? Is it opening, closing? How many businesses are open? How many are closed? So StatCan defines businesses as establishments, meaning one organization can have multiple businesses, right? 10 locations or 10 establishments, right? So it's not by the headquarter or the one company, it's by the establishment. So if you see that data, it's also broken down by those 6 major industries. At the very top, you have the accommodation food services, meaning there's 64 less businesses or fewer businesses compared to February pre-COVID February 2020 level. On the other side of the spectrum, you can see healthcare having 57 more than before, right? Retail trade also had 22 more. So in terms of that, that kind of shows you overall Saskatchewan have at this point 243 fewer active businesses compared to February pre-COVID February 2022 level. Again, these are businesses, not necessarily institutions or organizations. So multiple locations is factored in. Now let's move on to a little bit of CFIB data that's not StatCan data that have been showing so far. They survey their members of small businesses, right, mostly. And so what's happening with a small business, that's always they're the biggest employers, right? Small businesses occupy a larger share of the business community. And so it's important to see, how they're faring, right? So in terms of the CFIB data, you can see in terms of operation by the end of May, 79.6%, that's that big bar, the very left side, Saskatchewan small businesses were fully open, according to the latest CFIB COVID-19 survey. Over 1/3, 35.1% to be precise, of the businesses were above 95% of the usual revenues. So we can say 95%, meaning fully at their full capacity or full revenue, right? So 1/3 or 35.1% of the businesses are above their usual full revenue level compared to the same time of the year, right? So you can see that green bar here, larger green bar here. And if we move on to the yellow side of things, the staffing side, nearly half, almost 2%, 47.3%, you can see that larger bar here, the businesses were above their 95% of the usual staffing levels for this time of the year. So meaning they're at full staffing. So half of them are at full staffing, 1/3 of them are at full revenue, and 79.6% are fully open for operation, right? So I guess the green side kind of dictates the revenue and staffing, right? As you open more and open for full business, the revenue and staffing kind of follows that, right? But as you can see that half of the businesses, if you see from the other side, the glass is half full or half empty. If we see from the half empty side, on the staffing side, half of the businesses are still not at the full staffing level, and also 2/3 are not at the full revenue level, right? So anyways, not to be negative, but that is what we still to go for, right? So that's kind of like the business picture from the C5B survey data. Now enough of COVID, I guess. Let's move on to the future a little bit. I'll show some forecast data. Anyways, always one big caveat with forecast is we did this forecast in 2020, a time when no forecasters wanted to do a forecast because the uncertainty is too much. And you know how forecasts work, or how the weather forecast works, right? Labor forecast is no different. We don't have a crystal ball, but forecast is done based on what you are expecting at this point, right? Your current expectations, your current wisdom, or current knowledge that you have of the future, right? So, so we did a bit of a scenario-based forecasting, 3 scenarios, because we don't know what will happen, right? So we'll have kind of a range, right? So I'll explain that a little bit. So from a forecast side of things, what we have kind of gathered here that employment will slowly kind of regain, right? After a sharp decline in jobs in 2020, you can see the bar, that 26,800 below the zero level, right? So that was a job loss in 2020, no wonder, according to the provincial April 2021 budget. And then after a sharp decline like that, we'll have a sharp increase, in 2021. That's by the end of, we can see how much, but it's expected that it would be 15,000 jobs more. And then it will kind of slowly taper down on the recovery side. Obviously, it won't be as sharp, right, of an increase, but you'll still be on the positive zone and continue to have a bit of a growth on the employment bars here, right? 7,000, 6,000 jobs, kind of like equilibrium. And on the unemployment rate, which is kind of like a mirror image of the employment side here, right? You can see the linear graph, 8.4% unemployment rate in 2020, right? Massive, unprecedented number of unemployed. And then slowly the recovery unemployment rate fell to 6.5%, and slowly it's expected to hover around that 6%, 5% level going into the future. And by 2023, we are expecting that would recover and even surpass, 2019 level. So on the forecast side of things, we are not on a monthly zone. We are seeing things on an annual basis. So, it's not possible to forecast on a monthly basis, right? So by 2023, we would achieve 2019 level. So 2019, the whole annual level is, set as the pre-COVID level, not February 2020, as we were showing in the monthly side of things. So moving on to a little bit of the scenarios that I was talking about, like, how we did with the scenarios. Like, so with all the uncertainties last year, we thought, okay, let's do a baseline, which is in line with our Minister of Finance's budget that came out in 2021. And then, having a bit of a low end to it, that, okay, if we expect the COVID to drag on, have more, waves, and then businesses are not being able to open or find people, what will happen? That's the low scenario. And then on the high scenario, if things are being more optimistic, people get vaccinated sooner. We have the economy opened, supply side meets the demand side, everything is nice. So that's the more high optimistic, scenario. That's, you can see that from those three bars on the forecast side shaded, the high is on the violet one on the top, and the low is on the red one. The baseline, which is aligned with the Minister of Finance's forecast, is the green one here. So those are three scenarios, and then if we apply that to those 16 major industries,
Andrew, before you go on, could you go back to that slide
Sure.
with scenarios? And given what we have seen through the first months of this calendar year, which one of the three scenarios does it look like our trajectory will take us on?
Like at this point, we are at 98.4% recovery, right? So if you see those little box here, which gives you by year that we kind of, projected last year, on the base scenario here, 99.6%, you can see on 2021, where we are expecting that we would be at 99.9%. So we are in the kind of like in the medium scenario, right? We're already hitting that. So if we achieve by the end of this year, 100% of our, 2019 level, we would be at the high zone, which is expecting 100% recovery by 2021, right? So we are currently at the medium, at least, and then we'll have to see in the next half year how we fare. And if we achieve that 100%, we'd be at the high scenario in terms of the overall. But I mean, that's just the headline numbers, right? I mean, we have to break down by industry and see how each individual industries are doing, right? They might not all share the same rate as I was alluding towards during the K-shape conversation. So if I move on to the next industry slide here, you can see, similar kind of picture of a K kind of thing, that not all sectors are expected to perform at the same level. Starting at the top, accommodation and food services, right? Not full recovery by 2030. NFR is just a short form for not full recovery by 2030. Not in the low or medium, but in the high case scenario, we are thinking by 2028 we will have full recovery. But we have been seeing some pretty rapid growth in the hospitality sector on the demand side. So if the supply side can meet that, we might see sooner full recovery in that sector, right? So, but during 2020 when things were falling apart so much in the sector. The expectation was that it will take a bit of a time for it to fully recover. It's 2028. That was the expectation. On the on the bottom side of things here, which is it's a more positive wholesale retail trade. You can see here that we on the high scenario we were expecting by this year will already achieve the level which we are seeing from the monthly data that we have achieved that full recovery of wholesale retail trade. So we are hitting the high scenario on this industry, right? You can see from other sectors, manufacturing, we're seeing, okay, we'll achieve by 2020. We are seeing that in the data as well, that we are kind of in that zone. Construction as well, we are seeing in the medium scenario by 2023, we're already seeing full recovery on that sector. So it's some of these sectors are hitting their high scenarios already, right? And so maybe on the full side of scenario, as Dale was mentioning, are we in the medium or high? We're already at 98.4%. If we achieve the 100% recovery by this year, we'll be hitting the high scenarios, right? And some of these sectors are already hitting their high scenarios already. And so we'll have to see some of these lagging ones in the hospitality sector and other ones to see if they can achieve some of their low, some of the medium or high scenarios as well or not, right? So like I said, on the overall provincial scenario, even if it's high, all the industries may not be hitting their high scenarios, but we can see already that majority of the industries are already moving towards that kind of zone, right? Moving to that high scenario zone where we expected things to be open sooner, vaccines to be done sooner, and then economy booming faster, right? So
Doing a
that's
little
positive.
shadowing, Tanvir, if we, you've been talking about the K recovery, and we can see that in some of these graphics. We overlay what's happening on the job forecasting side with what we're seeing in terms of economic recovery. There's some structural changes that are happening within particular industries that may have started before the pandemic, but have definitely accelerated as we've gone through the last year. So we'll see a little bit of more of that a little further on into your presentation. But
right, in the automation section a little bit, yes. So yeah, so that's kind of like our expectation from last year's forecast. That's the industry side. On the occupation front, this is the whole provincial one. If we see in the top 10 occupations with the highest job openings expected in the 2020-24 5 years, next 5 year zone, managers in agriculture, which is again farmers, and the retail and wholesale trade managers, which are nurses. Those are the top numbers because of their sheer size of the workforce, right? They're also expected to be the top occupations providing highest number of forecasted job openings as well, right? So those are the top 10. I won't go through the list. I guess we'll share the PDF with you guys so you can see it later, but you can see what sectors they're in, right? It's mostly the education sector, health sector. Those are the top occupations. Moving on to a bit of a few, kind of as Dale was alluding, a bit of a structural change, right? Automation is something that became more front and center. Technology has become big talk here, right? It was already happening, but COVID kind of catalyzed some of those mega trends, and technology, automation, those kind of trends have kind of gotten a boost from COVID. I mean, any type of crisis usually leads to some kind of boost to some sectors or some trends. And automation is something that be it working from home, be it having less people to do the same output or same job, all these kinds of things have led many companies try out innovative ways, try out different technologies, right? And so that leads to more kind of like more inclination towards automation and technology usage, right? So retail jobs, for example, such as salespeople and cashiers can be at risk, right, by self-service technology or automation, right? Self-driven cars, right, for risk for truck drivers, maybe. But technology has historically created more jobs than it has eliminated. So there's always this doom and gloom. Robots are taking our jobs away, but there's always new jobs that always comes along, right? So it is more of a shift, as Dale was mentioning, a structural shift that happens rather than elimination of full side of jobs. So as we will kind of go a little bit in my next slides. On the skill side, right? Lower skill jobs are at risk of automation. Higher skill jobs are more to be created on that. But that kind of binary thinking, I would caution that doesn't suit anymore, because all we used to say in this automation kind of conversation that, oh, okay, lower skill jobs are more vulnerable to automation and technology innovation, right? But higher skill jobs are not, but not necessarily. It depends on the type of job you do. If it's routine based, if it's more repetitive, then yes, it's more vulnerable. But if it requires more human touch or more, it's ever changing, then or there's no business model to spend such capital to replace a human. So even lower skill jobs can be less automatable or less vulnerable to automation. And my next slide kind of says that here, like by industry, that's an OECD graph by industry. On the care side, the leisure side, on the care side, even if it's a low paid job or even if it's a lower skill job, not necessarily we want or there's a business model for robots to replace that, right? So even if it's lower scale, there can be still demand for or less demand for automation there on that side. On the other side of the spectrum, more things that are more have exposure to technology like space, exploration, or manufacturing, those kinds of things are more vulnerable to automation, I guess. That's the industry kind of picture here. And then if we apply, so what we did is there's lots of literature and studies in terms of automation and technological usage and whatnot, right? So we took some of those popular methodologies. Freya Osborne is one of them, a renowned economist on that. And then also McKinsey did a bit of a nice work on the task base. Like it's not about the whole occupation being automated, but what are the tasks in that occupation that's automatable, right? So rather than a whole occupation being automated or being replaced, it's the type of task that's being replaced, right? So you will do a different kind of task compared to what you were doing before. So that makes more sense in the automation literature nowadays. So we applied those methodologies on the Saskatchewan data, and that's this quadrant that you are seeing on the very right hand top corner. You can see the high, meaning in the two methodologies, they both came out as high. So 72 occupations out of the 500, we identified in Saskatchewan to be on the high spectrum. And on the very bottom left-hand corner and the corner quadrant here, low, meaning low on the both methodologies, there were 119 occupations that were the lowest spectrum of automation. So let's start with the high risk zone here. So as I mentioned, 73,000 jobs is kind of like what it equates to, the 72 occupations in terms of Saskatchewan's workforce. And that if we dissect that employment data, the top occupations would be wonder trades, transport and equipment operators, the trade side of things, right? 32%, followed by sales and service and hospitality sector, 31%. Then you have the business, finance, and administration at 25%, and manufacturing 11%. So those are the top 4 occupational groups in the highest risk spectrum. And if we look at some of those highest occupations, food counter attendants, right? Groups, carpenters, heavy equipment operators, welders, those are some of those top highest risk occupations falling in that zone. In terms of the lower side of the spectrum, like I said, 132,000 kind of jobs is what equates to the 119 occupations. If we drill down that by occupational groups. You can see here that education, law, social, community, and government, that's 36%. That's the highest, bigger sector. As I was saying, like, early childhood educators, maybe lower paid, maybe not so higher skilled jobs as perceived, but you don't see it to be replaced by a robot, right? You don't want your child to be taken care by a robot, I guess, and the business model doesn't exist. So even if it's lower skilled, doesn't necessarily mean it will be vulnerable to automation. It depends the type of work that occupation is doing, right? So you can see on the green pie here, education, law, social, and community and government, that's 36% falls on the lower skill spectrum. And no wonder management jobs, 30%, is also occupies a large portion on the lower skill spectrum, as management jobs requires critical thinking and ever changing, right? So you cannot have an algorithm to replace that, right? So yeah, and also in the health sector, right? I mean, that's also kind of on the lower side of the risk spectrum. And if we see on the occupation side of things, again, retail and wholesale trade managers, registered nurses, elementary school and kindergarten teachers, they're mostly social and community service workers. Those remain in the lower risk occupation. Not necessarily they're always the higher skilled occupations on traditional concept, but um, you can see they are on the lower risk of the spectrum. So just one point here that just showed you the two corners, right? The high and the low. But there's a whole gamut of occupations and industries falling in that middle section, right? The medium risk of things like that, which will be kind of like the two polar extremes. What I have shown here will fall in between that, right? So, like I said, it's not a bit of a binary thinking. Okay, lower skilled means vulnerable to automation, higher skill means it's not that straightforward. Depends on the type of task you're doing, what occupations they're doing. So skill shift and structural shift is very important, right? And so COVID, like Deb was mentioning, has brought up those things a bit on the forefront, right? And so we are expecting to see more shift or more quicker shift on those kinds of trends, right? So, so the supply side, the skills, or reskilling or different skilling is more would be more important in those conversations. Lastly, if I want to share Finnish automation with a bit of a regional perspective, this is something new that we have seen from Conference Board of Canada, having a bit of a regional perspective. Obviously, one region doesn't have an affinity towards robots than the other, but it depends on the occupation and industries that are present in that area, right? So in their study from 2016 data, they have seen that smaller metropolitan areas are more vulnerable to automation. That is mostly due to because small regions have, larger centers have more professional and, those kinds of office kind of jobs that you can, accommodate more easily, even if it's the technology is being used. But for some of these resource and Canada, how it is that, the resource-based economies of provinces have smaller cities as well, right? That also kind of, goes hand in hand. So, resource-based economies where you have more hands-on jobs that can't repetitive or can't replaced by, a robot, are more vulnerable, right? So smaller towns, aka having those kinds of sectors and occupations, are more vulnerable to to automation, right? So they have this AVI index. I don't know if you could. It's pretty small here at the chart, but automation vulnerability index that they came out with. And then on the labor force, they have the logarithmic scale on the right, on the x-axis. But you can see Regina, Saskatoon is kind of in the high AVI risk here, right? The red dots. The medium AVI risk is more Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, and then Quebec City and Montreal, they're on the lower risk spectrum here, right? So larger centers are more on the lower side of things. And then you can see Regina, Saskatoon, you can see even St. John's. So, far east of our country and then, far west of our country, both are resource kind of based, right? So you can see how they are more vulnerable to automation compared to some of those centers which are not resource-based economies, like in Toronto and Montreal and other cities. So yeah, that's more like a geographical breakdown of automation as according to a study by Council Board of Canada. So just to wrap up, sorry.
There's a comment, actually two, sadly, the highest risk automation are the entry-level jobs that youth and marginalized workers tend to gravitate towards when they enter the workforce. Also, that yes, that structural shift will likely hit those workers hardest. As you were going through there, there are some of those that policymakers, employers, parents, and youth and others need to be looking at and making choices. You have any other additional comments that you'd like to add, Tanvir?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Like, we typically in this automation conversation, we have always try to pick something that, that this group of people or this level of skill are more vulnerable. But as we have seen through those different researches that, it's not, yes, traditionally, because youth have been doing these kinds of lower skill jobs, which are repetitive and stuff like that. That's why they are vulnerable, right? So in terms of, the shift, if, there's a shift towards more the choice of their occupation that, okay, we want to do some other kinds of occupation, right? Even if they're, writing, right? There's a lot of demand for writing, for example. Like a lot of young people I've seen nowadays, they're going on, okay, I'll just write a report for you. And so those liberal arts kind of things may even come, stronger than that. So what I'm saying is this traditional thinking of, lower skill jobs will, just translate to, vulnerability, and hence people who are doing lower skill jobs, such as the youth doing entry level jobs, will, that kind of transformation or logical, inference might be a bit, risky because, not necessarily we're going to see that. And so if youth chooses to go for occupations that are not repetitive, maybe lower skill, but not repetitive, not, it requires creative thinking, they're not going to be in the zone of high risk, right? So even it pays $10 to write a report for someone, but it cannot be replaced by an algorithm. So my point is, so that shift, that kind of in youth or even vulnerable communities, that's the more vital point, I guess. What kind of occupation or kind of task that you are going forward towards, right? So those thinking of, okay, this group or this level of skill will be impacted end of period, that will not be true going forward. That's what some of these conversations coming in. It's a totally whole different way of thinking, like, breaking all the previous conventional thinking that we have, right? So yeah, it's a very interesting topic for sure. It requires a whole session of its own for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I should stop myself there and maybe finish up the presentation here, being cognizant of the time here. So to wrap up on the labor demand side of things. So COVID-19 continues to impact the economy. We're still not totally out of the woods, as we have seen from the recovery. Like, it's not 100% yet. Significant disruptions of business activity still there, despite a near fully open economy we have seen from the C5 data. Some sectors of the economy are still struggling as more than others, as we have seen in the K-shaped kind of industry breakdown. And at the same time, employers are having difficulties attracting the workers they need already, right? Some of you guys will have already faced that, it's not coming back as fast as you'd hope. And technology will obviously have an impact on the labor market, what we have seen through automation and whatnot, right? That's the demand side challenges. What about the supply side, right? Same. On the supply side of things, COVID is making people think, okay, should we get back to the same job as we are in, especially in the hospital sector? I've seen I'll refer to a quick article here. In the US, they have done some research and saying, okay, why are young people not coming back to the sector? during COVID, when they were laid off, they thought, okay, why does my neighbor would not have had a COVID-free job? Should I be moving in that sector? Right? People had the time and the resources to maybe sometimes think it over or have skilled themselves differently. And so it may not be exactly, hit pause and then go back to the same zone, right? So there could be some shifts in even on the supply side. Employees are thinking, do we go back to the same sector as we were working before? Maybe not. Maybe we should think over it, right? Heal ourselves differently. So, there would be supply side challenges coming out of this COVID, right? Layoffs and unemployment, could rise even more if the financial supports expire, right? There's that fear as well. Youth can still be at risk of protracted unemployment. I mean, they have fully recovered for sure now, but they're always typically in the jobs or type of jobs they do that put them at some bit of risk, right? A high number of NET means not in education, not in employment, education, and training. So that number could rise. And then the mental health impacts, right, on the labor force. That's something huge, right? We haven't delved into that data side, but that's a whole conversation of its own. Education and employment gaps among underrepresented groups, as someone mentioned, right? Indigenous people, persons with disabilities, that continues to be there, right? Huge gap. And then, like I said, COVID-19 would accelerate automation, displacing workers and creating skills mismatches, maybe, right? If we don't, or if the supply side doesn't react to the demand side appropriately, right? So, yeah, so those are some of the supply side challenges. Just some of it, right? There's more, but yeah, I would finish at that in being for the sake of the time here, and I guess you will take over for the next 3 slides, and you can ask me to, move to the next slide as you go. Thank you.
And just before we jump in there, I just want to, thanks Tanvir for walking us through there. There's a lot of information that we went through, and you can see that the impact of COVID is long, protracted, and it is, even though we're coming out the other side, there are things that we as employers need to keep in mind. We've got a number of individuals who at the front end of the career are looking at different options, different ways. Do I choose my career over my lifestyle? At the opposite end of the spectrum, people who were at the cusp were making decisions. Should I retire? Should I not? Some are leaving. So the kinds of challenges that we've been talking about, automation, and whether or not a particular sector is booming or not, we're going to see some interesting trends over the next several months. And the next section that we're going to talk about is what does Saskatchewan business do? How can we get on the bandwagon regardless of these challenges in the labor force, regardless of the challenges in the economy? And Anna, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Dale, and thank you to Tanvir too for the context around how Saskatchewan's doing, where we're going, and what's to come. So I'm excited to talk about that Saskatchewan business is on the road to rebounding, and the reopening is underway. So as you're all aware, that on July 11th, our province will enter into step 3 of the reopen roadmap, removing all restrictions in place during the pandemic. And with this, our ministry's activities are designed to balance immediate and future labor demands to support competitiveness, economic recovery, and meet the goals of the Saskatchewan Plan for Growth. In particular, when we speak about the labor force and talent in our growth plan, it speaks about including 100,000 more people working in our province, and to increase our population to 1.4 million by 2030. As Tanvir had presented, we are leading the way across Canada for strong economic growth in some sectors who have already met the full job recovery. So we're excited that our economy will boom even faster going into the next few months and the next few years, as Dale had alluded to as well, and we'll need to continue to be flexible and resilient as we move along. Us at Employer Services and at ICT, we can help you as you try to build your plan to facilitate your reopening and into growth as well. We're also very eager to work with you as businesses to design services and programs to prepare workers for your specific jobs and your skills that you need for your business. As part of our recovery plan, various programs throughout were implemented to complement existing investments in skills training and to develop our workforce through employer-driven financial supports such as the Reopen Saskatchewan training subsidy. ICT offers programs and services aimed at building a talent pool to attract, develop, retain employees that make it easy for you to navigate and access government programming. Next slide. So how are we going to get there? So as Tanvir indicated, it's not business as usual. So for small businesses that, one of his slides had indicated that over half of the businesses were above 95% of the usual staffing levels for this time last year. So as part of your recovery talent plan, how can we help? And what are some key strategies for you to consider? So developing and renewing a workforce plan, reviewing your staffing needs pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, considerations for realignment. How do we plan and create a timeline with specific actions for you that make sense for you as a business? Is there a skills gap? Are there training options or support? And then when we look at development of talent sourcing and recruitment strategy, when are you going to be calling back staff? Are people going to still continue to work from home? How can you access the provincial labor force? Who and where can I find them? Is it posting on SAS Jobs, on National Job Bank, looking at training institutions throughout the province, working with ICT career services and community-based organizations throughout the province as well? Or do we need to look outside of the province, depending on where you are in your cycle, depending what industry you're in? All these questions are important as you kind of build your plan. And how do we help you build the connections and build that pipeline of talent that you need at the right time? So when we look at designing the employee value proposition focused on retaining a skilled and diverse workforce, so diversity inclusion has become sort of a very large and complex concept through the last year in particular. But how do we create that? How do you create that in regards to a workplace and become an employer of choice? Look at identifying strategies and engage current and new talent to your workplace and create more opportunities for growth and for career growth, but also job growth overall. And how do you attract and retain employees as well? So when you look at the employee value proposition, look at where we're going to help kind of go through your compensation, your reward system, your workplace culture. What else does it make? What else will attract talent to your business? So as I spoke about before, ICT works with various agencies and community-based organizations that can target on underrepresented groups to maintaining employment that includes Indigenous people, youth, older workers, and workers with disabilities. Next slide. So how to get a hold of us? We know that there's going to be challenges to finding the labor that you need, as already Tanvir kind of alluded to in his last slide. There's a lot of things that are coming out of the pandemic that we don't have control of as a business owner, but we can try to navigate that with you and help you through that. So at Employer Services, we have concierge services and outreach to employers and other stakeholders to navigate some of these federal and provincial supports. Labor market priorities are reviewed with various stakeholders and industries to ensure that you have the talent you need when you need it, and that we look at different pools of labor throughout the province, throughout Canada, and internationally as well, not just from the recruitment side, but retention is also very important. So with that, there's lots of programs that our team, there's our phone number, our email as well. SAS Jobs is one of our main tools that you have, and National Job Bank for you to post jobs that is free to get that exposure you need, to get the talent you need. That information is critical for us too as government regards to one of the slides that Tanvir had presented about, tells us exactly what industries are looking, what are they looking for, and where to find these people as well. So that helps us create a plan internally within government to ensure that we're focusing on our efforts in regards to the resourcing to our institutions, to programming throughout the province. So it's important for you to kind of know that, to get more exposure to you as a business overall, and get as many resumes in your hands, and hopefully the right talent in your hands as well. And obviously there's other programs that we have, like that I kind of on the slide there, National Job Bank, SAS Jobs that I spoke about. There's also a lot of federal programs as well, like wage subsidies, all those kinds of things that the federal government has introduced in the last year during the pandemic that are available, but as part of the recovery as well, that they've introduced a lot of new programming that we hope to partner with our federal partners as well to provide you with the information, but also to access that as well. So with that, in closing, I'm sure I'm going to throw it back to you, Dale, if there's anything else that I may have missed or anything that you would like to include, and then we can open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Anna. And yes, there's a number of programs and assistances that can be provided. Our job grant program is very successful and is helping a lot of organizations in terms of upskilling and getting the kind of talent that they need and the skill sets that are required that are right inside their own shop. So thanks to you, Anna. Thanks, Tanvir, for the presentations. And Nicole, let's just open it up to questions.
Yes, you bet. Thank you to Dale, Tanvir, and Anna. There's a lot of really great information that was shared. Some really encouraging numbers that we're seeing for Saskatchewan as well. So that was really great to see. Again, if anyone does have any questions, we've got a bit of time left, so please put those in the chat, and we've got the teams here to answer them. So take advantage of this opportunity. And again, just to mention, we will be sharing the presentation along with the recording from today's meeting as well. So I might start off with a question. I found the automation information really interesting, and I was just wondering if those numbers and that data is factored into the job forecast information that you shared. Like, are we considering that when we're forecasting job growth? Is that taking into account what we're anticipating to see in terms of jobs replaced by automation?
Yeah, I would take that question, I guess. So in terms of the forecasting side, it takes account into all kinds of trends, right? Not necessarily one thing at a time, like, specifically automation or green jobs, or, there's lots of other kind of trends, right? There's a shift and those kinds of things. So the occupational forecast comes out from a top-down approach from the economic side of things, from the GDP side, and then it boils down to the economic side. So intrinsically, it captures all those kinds of shifts and changes that we have been seeing in the past and also going forward. So that kind of thing is happening. So it necessarily does not include any specific trend like automation or moving towards more cleaner energy, but those kinds of trends are part of the macroeconomy, and so that the better the model is, the better it should capture those kinds of trends, right? So yeah, but like I said, forecasting is no crystal ball, right? I mean, it tries to capture all those kinds of things, but we have to take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Thank you. We have a question in the chat from the group here. An interesting stat is the faster increase in staffing with the revenues lagging a bit. Would an assumption be that businesses are forecasting an increase in revenue to start catching up with the staffing increase as we return to normal?
It would tend to be industry specific, I would think but I think you're right. Some industries didn't feel any real impact over the course, depending on their own service delivery models. But there are, moving forward, some light at the end of the tunnel. So some of the demand that we're seeing, as Tanvir cleverly described, the job vacancy rate is a leading indicator to that kind of recovery that you're describing.
Thanks. Another question to the chamber. So I'll maybe take a crack at it and then turn it over to ICT as well to get your perspective. But has the chamber heard any specific concerns from employers regarding economic recovery from COVID? So differences in job seeking behavior, workplace requests and expectations, and are there any common themes? So I'll take a crack at that and then turn it over to Dale and your team if you have any further comments. We have certainly. We've been hearing that there are, I guess, changing expectations from potential employers in terms of what they want their work to look like. So, there are a lot of individuals that have been working from home, working remotely, and they want to continue to do that. And there are, business environments that are moving back to the office and aren't going to continue to work remotely. And so I think we're going to see some movement in terms of what we're hearing in terms of that labor supply, just everybody kind of finding the right fit for them going forward from the business perspective in terms of what that workplace is going to look like and what they want that culture to look like, and then potential employees and how they fit into that. And I don't know that anybody knows exactly what that's going to look like yet. That's also something that we've been hearing is there's still a lot of uncertainty. Some businesses still don't know exactly how they're going to bring everyone back, kind of re-engage them into the workforce. So that those are conversations that we're continuing to have. But we are certainly seeing a change in some of those expectations, both from the employer and the employee side on our end. Dale or anyone from your team, do you have any further comments on that?
Yeah, for sure. There's a number of different dimensions to this. Not only are we seeing changes in employee perspectives and behaviors, the desire maybe not to work in an office space or in a retail location, but work from my deck. Decisions about lifestyle, but employers as well. Changes in consumer behavior being impacted here, and they, all of these will feed into the conversation. We really will have to wait to see the full impact over the course of the next while. I'm also going to maybe invite, I think Ken Duvick is in the room still, and Ken is leading the business response team and are dealing directly with employers and associations and whatnot from the perspective of the impact that the various guidelines on when we were shutting down through some of the recovery. Ken, are you hearing anything different in terms of behaviors that are manifesting itself out there? Well, maybe Ken's not there.
We may have lost Ken.
Okay.
I don't see him there. I don't know if does Anna have any comments on that? Ken's absence?
Yeah, I can make a few comments on that. Thanks, Dale, for the question. I think you're right. It's changing the way that we do business in general, right? Overall, I think that you had commented about earlier as well, and to Nicole's comment too, like it's changing on the job seeker side, but on the business side too. And to go back to my comment about even designing the employee value proposition, right? Is this a new model, or is this a new service delivery that we want to continue overall? Like we take the restaurant industry in particular, right? Where obviously online pickup, online, deliveries, all that kind of stuff was part and parcel as part of our the service delivery model already, but in particular when restaurants couldn't have people in there, you had to adjust, right? Overall, would we continue that going forward? will they continue to have that part of their revenue stream, or will it had to become some of the businesses that we heard from in particular said actually their revenue actually increased more in that regards because their labor costs had gone down. So I think it's, as you stated, Nicole, it's just adjusting to just even the business is maybe they're not even going to go back to a dine-in, setup or a full office setup because of the potential for businesses for cost savings, but also to deliver their service or product to their client and their customer has significantly changed, right? And that some of the markets that I think even some of the businesses like retail is another one, that I'm thinking about too is, curbside pickup, right? That was a mute thing that was just starting, but then it really boomed during the pandemic because people couldn't go into stores anymore overall. But what we heard from some associations and some of the businesses through the BRT is that it created those new opportunities, really, that they never realized they had before until they were forced to make those decisions. So I think the pandemic has kind of shifted some of the mindset for businesses that they could pivot really quickly. In some cases, it was a little bit more challenging, and some that they could do it overall. And some businesses that we heard from in particular are keeping some of those practices actually in place in regards to our product and services going into the recovery mode overall in regards to just meeting the new demand that's out there, but also thinking about the competitive advantage that brings to them if they continue overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's very consistent with what we've been hearing as well. In some cases, the pandemic was that bit of a push that a lot of businesses needed to really pivot and innovate and do things differently in the long term. I guess the other piece of that I was thinking about, going back to Tanvir's information that he shared, when we're looking at our labor market supply and some potential challenges that are going forward, with the shift to working from home, working from anywhere, that also kind of opens up a pool of candidates from, across Canada or anywhere in the world that we wouldn't have necessarily had before for a lot of positions. So I'm interested to see how that changes over the next little while. If, we've been hearing that a bit from our local businesses that they're starting to get a lot more applicants from outside of the province interested in working remotely for their businesses. And so I think that opens up a whole other kind of dynamic and dimension to all of the data and statistics as well. So, all right. Maybe just kind of building on one of the things that you talked about a little bit in terms of kind of the support that your team offers and the conversations that you've been having in terms of reopening, knowing that we have a lot of business owners on the call, and this July 11th removing a lot of restrictions is on everyone's mind. Are there kind of things that you've been hearing from businesses in terms of that July 11th date and their plans or their common questions, things coming out of that we can share more broadly with the group?
We really are seeing some very interesting times, some large new investment into the province. In areas like canola crushing, biofuels, construction. We've got all kinds of activity that's going on that will spur on the recovery, perhaps even quicker than some of our graphs are showing. So it is a cautionary tale. It won't take us very long to go back. Saskatchewan being my home province, I'm glad to be back. But I've done a fair bit of traveling around the world, and I spent some time in Edmonton during the big boom time then, when businesses, rather than going out of business because they weren't able to generate business, they just couldn't find people to run the business. So we've got to be cognizant of this, and employers, we introduced a concept today, the employee value proposition. And that is about, why would people come to work for you? why will they stay? It's not only about money. You've just got to be competitive with what the marketplace is paying. But why, as an employer, would someone come to work for you? It's a work environment, opportunities for growth, opportunities for personal and professional development, uh, inclusion and diversity. Those are the conversations that are going on today, and the need to make sure that people not only are there doing their work, but they feel safe and in part of the community that the organization where they are, and the community of the employer themselves. It's a pretty daunting task to say the least, as we're going to be heading into a place, Tanvir and the data showed us, we're pretty much at that quote unquote full employment space. There's always going to be churn in an economy, because of, in a healthy economy, people are looking for new opportunities or otherwise. Just superimpose that conversation on top of this idea that we are heading towards some pretty fantastic opportunities economically, and as employers, what do we need to do? How can we source talent? How do we actually get them in the door? How do we train them, and how do we keep them?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation for a while, as businesses sort through that and figure out exactly what that means for their organization going forward. Everyone's been really focused on surviving over the last 15 months, really. And so now coming out of that, it's okay, what do we want to be and look forward to kind of in the future? Absolutely. We have one more question in the chat here. Any thoughts on the shift that's been sped up by COVID in retail to being online, especially with more and more people using Amazon?
Yeah, excellent question. There is a shift. Will it continue? That will bear out in the next several months. There are lots of organizations that have made the shift in their service delivery model to an online delivery. But countering that, now we're starting to hear more, and maybe Nicole, you can talk a little bit about this from the Chamber's perspective. That push for look local, buy local, because these are your neighbors, these are your friends who own the local businesses in Regina, in the communities across the province. Is it going to counter this push towards doing all your shopping, grocery shopping, clothes shopping, house shopping on the couch? And just even the social aspect of this, how many people are just going to put their phone down for a while so they can talk to somebody face to face in July 11th, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we've seen, there's definitely been that focus on shop local, and that's, I think, going to continue. I know that's something that we're continuing to focus on as a chamber. But we've also seen really incredible support for our local businesses as well. And a lot of that has just been community-based, everyone kind of rallying together and supporting our local businesses. And so I hope that we continue to see that. A lot of our local businesses have also introduced online options so that they can, compete with the Amazon to some extent. And I think that's something that we want to continue to help local organizations do as well, to make sure that they're able to remain competitive and serve a number of different audiences. But I agree. I don't know. I think once people can safely, feel comfortable being out in the community a bit more, I think we'll see a bit of a shift back to that local support for our retail. At least I really sincerely hope that we do, because our local businesses are a huge part of our economy. So
Mhm. Yeah, very much so.
great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for a really great presentation, great conversation this afternoon. Thanks to Tanvir and Anna and Dale for all of your insight and input. It's a really informative discussion. We do have a draw for a gift certificate, so don't run away yet. We have a gift certificate for the optical shop that's been donated today. So Dale, I might get you to do the honors of choosing a number between 1 and, what have we got? 1 and 33. Give us a number between 1 and 33, Dale.
Okay. And this is not even a random number. Some of the folks who when we were preparing to do this, I made mention that my granddaughter is just graduated from preschool today, and she is age 5.
5. Lucky number 5. Jeanette, who's our winner?
Please forgive me if I hack your name. Tammy Sadaba, sorry, from Regina Work Prep. We will mail that out to you.
Perfect. Congratulations, Tammy. And again, thank you to our sponsors and to everyone for attending today. We will be posting all this information on our website, and we'll post the contact information for ICT as well if you need to reach out to them for some of their resources. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day.